It was full at midnight, and gone by sunrise. A meal no one would forget. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Let's hear it. Where are you watching from right now? Your comments make this community feel alive. Let's begin. If there's anything in this world that can get Nero Wolfe to frown before he's finished his corned beef hash and eggs, it's a phone call before 9 in the morning. I was 3/4 through my own plate. Scrambled eggs with scallions, and a righteous pile of toast, when the phone rang, shrill and insistent enough to make me consider cutting the wire. Wolfe didn't budge from his seat at the kitchen table, didn't even glance up from the copy of Gastronomica spread out in front of him. It was the look he gave me instead, a slow, glowering lift of the eyebrow that told me it was my problem. Wiped my hands, muttered something that could pass for a prayer, and picked up. Goodwin, residence of Nero Wolfe, master of orchids, gourmet, reluctant solver of other people's mistakes. State your business or hang up. On the other end, a woman's voice broke in, breathless and urgent. "Mr. Goodwin, please, I need to speak to Mr. Wolfe. It's an emergency." "They all are, sister. Specify your brand of trouble." I kept my tone light, but my instincts sharpened. Genuine desperation sounds different from the kind people fake to get attention. This wasn't faked. There's been a theft. No, it's more than that. It's... She broke off with a ragged breath. "I can't explain it on the phone. I'll pay whatever the fee is, just... Please, there's a rule at the brownstone about money talks. Wolfe doesn't move an inch for under $1,000 retainer, and emergencies are charged at premium rates with no haggling." But this lady didn't sound like she cared about price tags, and if Wolfe noticed the tone in my voice as I answered, he didn't show it. "Come by," I said. 35th Street, the brownstone with the attitude. Bring yourself your wallet and your problem." I hung up before she could second-guess it. I turned to Wolfe, who was buttering a piece of toast like it had insulted him personally. "Brace yourself. Calamity inbound," he grunted. It might have meant anything from "let them come" to "damn you for picking up." The kitchen clock ticked through another 5 peaceful minutes before the doorbell buzzed. I glanced at Wolfe. He hadn't moved. I went to answer it, standing. On the stoop was a woman who looked like she belonged in a picture frame labeled "desperate yet determined." Mid-30s, messy blonde hair pinned back like she'd forgotten to check the mirror, and eyes so sharp they practically whistled. She clutched a leather-bound folder like it was a life vest. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, "you're close. Come in." I ushered her into the front room, noting the way she kept glancing behind her like she expected to be followed. Not nerves, exactly. More like someone who knew how quickly things could go wrong. In the office, Wolfe sighed heavily, but did not stand. He never stands for clients. She paused, flustered by the spectacle of 280 pounds of disinterest parked behind a mahogany desk. "You're Mr. Wolfe," she said unnecessarily. "You are perceptive." Wolfe's voice could have refrigerated milk. "State your business concisely." She swallowed and nodded. "My name is Claire Fenwick. I manage operations for Fenwick & Cole Catering. We specialize in corporate events, weddings, conventions. We had a big contract this weekend. Breakfast catering for the Newark Regional Contractors Conference. 2,000 attendees, very important. Yesterday morning, one of our trucks disappeared." "Disappeared," Wolfe repeated, as if she had confessed to losing a pair of socks. "Yes, gone, vanished, no trace." She opened the folder and pulled out a sheaf of papers, schedules, manifests, invoices, organized to the last paperclip. "We prepped everything Saturday night. At 5 a.m., the loading dock foreman checked the trucks, all accounted for. By 6 a.m., one missing." I let out a low whistle. "Big truck," she nodded. "A refrigerated catering truck, fully loaded. Breakfasts for 800 people. Croissants, fruit platters, eggs, yogurt parfait, custom smoothies, everything gone, along with a driver." That got Wolfe's attention. He shifted a millimeter in his chair. The driver? Jared Lomax, 24, freelance, no prior issues. We hired him for the event through a subcontractor. Police? Wolfe asked, eyes half closed. Of course. They took a report. Suggested he absconded with the truck to sell the food on the black market. It's ridiculous. Who would steal 2,000 croissants? Indeed. Wolfe rested his fingertips together. Why not simply claim the insurance? She stiffened. Because if this gets out, it ruins our reputation. We have 3 major contracts pending. If we look unreliable, we lose everything. And you propose... What? Wolfe said, drowsily polite. I want you to find out what really happened. Quietly, before this blows up. Wolfe closed his eyes. He hates theft cases. They're grubby, and they usually come with lawyers attached like lampreys. But something about the way Claire Fenwick stood there, stubborn and humiliated and furious at herself for needing us, sparked his interest. Maybe it was the professional pride. Maybe it was the breakfast pastries. You will deposit a retainer of $4,000, Wolfe said. Payable immediately. Mr. Goodwin will obtain a receipt. Claire Fenwick didn't even blink. She opened her purse, counted out the cash, and placed it on the desk with a soft thud. Wolfe opened one eye and regarded it. Then, without a flicker of expression, he closed the gastronomica and set it aside. Very well, he said. Mr. Goodwin, we'll commence inquiries. You will meanwhile remain available for further questioning. And just like that, breakfast was officially over. Archie's witty, fast-moving voice, Wolfe's verbal, immovable dominance. The minor disruption, hook with hidden stakes, casual but layered tension ready to escalate. Claire Fenwick had barely made it out the door when Wolfe announced, without lifting his eyes from the $4,000 now resting comfortably on his blotter, "The office will be fouled for the remainder of the day. I abhor foulings, Archie. Minimize the stench." He wasn't talking about anything aromatic, unless you count human desperation as a scent. What Wolfe meant was that we were about to have a parade of outsiders traipsing through the sacred brownstone, carrying with them all the chaos, confusion, and culinary incompetence of the outside world. First on the list, Fenwick's co-manager, her accountant, the subcontractor who'd hired the missing driver, and a handful of event staff who had worked the weekend shift. Wolfe demanded to hear directly from the supporting cast before I chased them down in the wild. At 9:15 sharp, I put the office into reception mode. Desk cleared, ashtrays emptied, yellow couch cushions plumped, standard damage control. Wolfe retreated behind his desk like a turtle into its shell, assuming the classic immovable posture. Half-closed eyes, fingers steepled, faint look of contempt offered generously to all visitors, regardless of income bracket. Fritz brought in black coffee, served with an extra napkin for me and none for Wolfe, a subtle commentary on who was going to be doing the heavy lifting. First through the door was the co-manager, a wiry little guy named Martin Cole, who looked like he counted calories the way bankers count pennies. He was polite enough but had the natural nervousness of someone who spent his professional life worrying that the eggs weren't arriving on time or the vegan clients weren't properly appeased. He sat stiffly across from Wolfe and launched into his speech. "It's inconceivable that Jared would do something like this," he said, hands knotting themselves in his lap. "He was reliable, quiet, never gave us any trouble." "Until he absconded with your breakfast," I offered helpfully. Cole flushed. "Something must have happened. He wouldn't," he faltered. "He wouldn't risk everything. He was trying to get hired full-time." Wolfe twitched a finger. "Did he express dissatisfaction recently? Financial pressures? Personal grievances?" "No." Cole shook his head emphatically. "If anything, he was grateful. He even asked if we could recommend him to another catering service for more gigs." "Had he enemies among your staff?" Wolfe asked. Cole blinked. "Enemies? No, he barely talked to anyone." I watched Wolfe's expression for changes, but he was as still as ever. Me, I wasn't buying it. No one walks away from a sure thing without a reason or a shove. Next came the accountant, a woman named Helen Dobbins, who wore thick glasses and an expression that said she distrusted sunlight on principle. She produced ledgers, insurance forms, and a seating chart for the conference that looked like a labyrinth designed by a drunk minotaur. The missing truck was insured, she said, without being asked. But the loss won't cover the reputation damage. We've already had 2 contract clients call to confirm if we were still reliable. Words getting around. She said it like she wanted to personally strangle the leak. Or maybe the whole press. Wolfe, uninterested in matters of public relations, asked, "Have your books been tampered with?" "No, I checked everything. All transactions are clean." "How would you know if someone skimmed catering inventory for private sale?" I asked. She bristled. "Our inventory is locked down. Drivers don't have access to raw stock. They're assigned loaded trucks. Manifest is signed at pickup and verified at delivery. And yet," Wolfe murmured, "your manifest has vanished with the truck." Dobbins pressed her lips together but didn't argue. One by one the others filed through. The subcontractor was a greasy-looking charmer named Eddie Grissom, whose handshake had enough oil on it to dress a salad. He defended himself with the usual song and dance about background checks, excellent recommendations, and not being responsible once the guy was behind the wheel. "Hell, I'm a victim too," he insisted. "My company's insurance is gonna get dinged. You think I wanted this?" No one thinks they want trouble until it's served with toast and coffee. Finally, 2 of the weekend kitchen staff came through, a prep cook and a logistics runner. Both confirmed that Jared Lomax had been at the loading dock early, sipping a bad coffee and joking about having to get up before the roosters. No fights, no drama, no suspicious glances toward the horizon. Just a guy doing a shift. But something still stank. Not literally. Fritz would have burned sage if it had. But figuratively, the brownstone now carried the heavy odor of a puzzle. No obvious motive, no warning signs, and no trace. When the last outsider had been ushered out, I returned to the office to find Wolfe still rooted behind his desk, fingertips pressed lightly together, eyes half-lidded in thought. "Well," I said, "you want me to start flipping over rocks?" He opened one eye at me. "You will visit the dock, see it for yourself, speak with the foreman, retrace Mr. Lomax's steps." "And what are you going to do?" I asked. Wolfe said with infinite dignity, "I'm going to digest breakfast. And think." He closed his eye again. It figured. If Nero Wolfe ever had to pick between solving a crime and digesting his meal, the crime had better hope it wasn't in a hurry. The brownstone's sacred disruption, Wolfe's complete immobility but mental alertness, Archie handling the parade of characters, each suspicious in small ways, the slow methodical layering of tension without any premature reveals. After spending 20 minutes listing synonyms for wild goose chase in my head, I finally grabbed my coat and headed out, leaving Wolfe to ponder philosophy or the virtues of a perfectly chilled yogurt parfait. It was a damp grey morning, and the sidewalk glistened with leftover puddles that hadn't gotten the memo it wasn't raining anymore. I flagged a cab and gave the address Claire Fenwick had scrawled on the folder. A commercial warehouse district on the south side, about as scenic as a forgotten sock. The catering company's loading dock was a concrete bunker wedged between a discount furniture outlet and a sheet metal supplier. A half-dozen white catering trucks lined the lot like sentinels who'd forgotten their duties. All identical, except for the obvious fact that one wasn't there. The dock foreman was a wiry man named Walt Gruber, built like a sapling that had seen a few too many storms. He wore a battered Mets cap and the guarded expression of someone who's dealt with too many people asking questions they already knew the answers to. "You from the insurance company?" he asked when I introduced myself, Private investigation, strictly freelance, Nero Wolfe's office. He grunted, unimpressed. Figures. They don't think we can tie our own shoelaces without supervision. I gave him a grin and a shrug. That said probably true, and pulled out my notepad. Walk me through it. Gruber led me to the dock's edge. All the trucks were lined up there. 5 catering rigs, fully loaded Friday night. Double-checked every damn lock myself. Saturday. Morning, Jared shows up early even, 4:45. Staff starts rolling in by 5:15. By 6, someone notices truck number 3's missing. He jabbed a thumb at a security camera mounted above the dock. That was supposed to be recording. Turns out it was unplugged, cable sliced. I raised an eyebrow. Sliced when? Must have been overnight Friday. We didn't notice until we checked after the truck was gone. Neat work? He shook his head. Messy. Looked like someone yanked it, then cut it when it didn't give. That didn't sound like the handiwork of a mastermind, more like an amateur, or someone trying to fake an amateur's mistakes. And Jared? I asked. Last seen, sipping coffee and leaning against the dock rail. Said he was waiting for the okay to pull out. Anyone see him drive off? No. That's the weird part. Nobody saw the truck leave. Nobody saw Jared leave. It's like, poof. Magic trick. I scanned the parking lot. No obvious cover, no heavy trees, no easy exits without someone noticing. Unless... blind spots? Gruber nodded reluctantly. Yeah. The service road behind the warehouse. If someone moved the truck while most of the staff were busy inside, maybe. But moving a catering truck wasn't like sneaking off with a tricycle. It takes noise, coordination, and nerve. Who had access to the keys, I asked. Gruber shrugged. They were locked in the dispatch office. Only supervisors had codes. And Jared wasn't a supervisor? Nope. Just a driver. Interesting. Either he'd been given access, or someone had helped him. I spent another 20 minutes taking photos, jotting notes, and nodding sagely at tire tracks that told me absolutely nothing. Then I headed back toward the brownstone, mulling the facts. Truck gone, driver gone, no footage, no witnesses. Neat on paper. Too neat. By 3 o'clock we had our preliminary circle of suspects drawn tighter than a noose. Wolfe had me arrange them into what he grandly called a practical schema of duplicity. I called it a headache. At the center was Jared Lomax, the vanished driver. 24 clean record. No priors, no debts we could find yet. Freelance caterer trying to hustle full-time work. No obvious reason to toss away a rising career unless someone made it worth his while, or unless he wasn't the one who drove off. Surrounding Jared were 4 people with connections juicy enough to warrant second looks. Martin Cole, the co-manager. Polite, nervous, obsessive about logistics, but maybe too obsessive. If you knew how the schedule worked, where the keys were kept when the cameras went dead, you had opportunities. Plus, if the company collapsed, who'd be first in line to start a spin-off with ready-made client lists? Eddie Grissom, the subcontractor, greasy enough to fry bacon on. His company supplied freelance drivers. If Jared's vanishing act was staged, Eddie could have brokered it, for a fee. Maybe he knew the truck's contents were more valuable on the black market than catered croissants. Helen Dobbins, the accountant. Nobody trusts accountants until they stop showing up for work. Helen had the books locked tight, but that just meant she controlled what anyone else could see. A theft staged right could launder missing inventory or cover prior embezzlement. The lost truck could be the smoke for a different fire. Natalie Ward, the event coordinator. New player on the board. Claire Fenwick hadn't mentioned her, but my sniffing around uncovered her involvement. She handled on-site logistics for the conference. Parking, deliveries, staff oversight. If anyone knew how to slip a vehicle out, unnoticed, it was her. Plus, she had a recent firing from her last job for unprofessional conduct, which the polite translation of caused a mess and walked away whistling. That was the spread. 4 spoons in the soup, each stirring trouble their own way, and Wolfe, as always, waited for the taste test before passing judgment. That evening, I gave Wolfe the complete rundown while he sat in his oversized chair sipping a beer and sulking about the humidity. When I finished, he lifted a hand. "Enough, I require no more hypothesis at this juncture. You will conduct interviews." "Separate or together?" I asked. He pondered, then said, "Separate. Intimacy encourages contradiction." He wasn't wrong. People lie in company. They confess in solitude. "And if none of them cracks?" I asked. He opened one eye and looked at me with pity. "They will." That was Wolfe for you. Modesty wasn't among his vices. I spent the next half hour setting up interviews for the following day. Casual meetings, no confrontations, no subpoenas. Wolfe wanted to watch them squirm before he roasted them properly. As I was typing up the schedule, Fritz stuck his head in. "Mr. Goodwin, there is a package for you." "For me?" I frowned. Fritz nodded. It was left on the doorstep, no signature. I opened the package. Inside, cushioned between folds of brown paper, was a single catering menu. Fenwick and Coles, unmistakably, with a red circle drawn around one particular item. Breakfast croissant package item number 7, Executive Deluxe, with imported white truffle shavings. And at the bottom of the page, scrawled in messy, urgent handwriting, "Not about the food." Smooth, natural continuation, building a web of suspects, motives, and connections, introducing the first tangible clue, anonymous tip, without premature reveals, maintaining Archie's observational, witty voice, keeping Wolfe inert but mentally commanding the... Next morning, I hit the streets with a clean suit, a full notebook, and a head full of questions that Wolfe would have considered sordid but necessary. There's a certain rhythm to digging for truth. Show up casual, play dumb just enough to make them talk, and let silence do half the work. People hate silence even more than they hate suspicion. First stop was Martin Cole, the co-manager, who had agreed to meet me at the catering office. I found him in a tiny side room lined with clipboards and laminated charts, sipping herbal tea like a man trying to believe his world wasn't tilting off its axis. He gave me a tight smile and gestured for me to sit. I ignored the rickety folding chair he offered and leaned casually against the filing cabinet instead. I like to have height advantage when poking around someone's conscience. "So, Martin," I said, flipping open my notebook, "explain something to me. How does a driver with no access to keys, no camera footage, and no backup plan steal a fully loaded truck without anyone noticing?" He grimaced. "I don't know, honestly. It baffles me." I nodded, pretending to scribble something. "You and Claire Fenwick, good working relationship?" "Yes, absolutely." His voice hitched slightly. "Ever feel underappreciated?" He blinked. "No. Claire's fair." "Demanding but fair." I let a pause hang there. His fingers tapped the side of his teacup. "Nervous energy or just caffeine overdose?" "And the contract?" I asked. "You lose this gig, you still got others lined up?" He hesitated. "Just a flicker, but enough. We have a few pending bids." I nodded thoughtfully. "Lot easier to start fresh if the competition takes a hit, isn't it?" He stiffened. "If you're implying—" "I'm not implying anything yet." I smiled pleasantly. "Just gathering a picture." He fidgeted but offered nothing new. If Martin Cole was involved, he wasn't going to crack this early. I'd have to circle back later when the pressure rose. Next was Eddie Grissom, the subcontractor, with enough oil on his skin to start a side business in lubrication. We met at a diner near the docks at his request. He said he liked to keep it public, which translated roughly to, "I don't trust private conversations." Fine by me. I didn't trust him either. Eddie slid into the booth with the kind of greasy confidence that came with years of slipping through loopholes. He ordered black coffee and a cinnamon roll, inhaled both, and grinned at me like we were old pals. "So, you want to know about Jared, huh?" he said, wiping his fingers on a napkin. "That's the general idea. Good kid, quiet, did what he was told, wouldn't steal a paperclip without asking permission first. And yet he stole a truck full of breakfast." He shrugged elaborately. "Maybe somebody made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Like who?" He leaned back, spreading his arms wide. "Hey, this city's full of vultures, pal. I don't keep tabs on who's making stupid decisions. Maybe you just point them in the right direction?" His grin thinned slightly. "Careful, buddy, I don't take kindly to accusations." I smiled sweetly. "Who said anything about accusations?" He leaned forward, voice lowering. "Listen, whatever Jared's into, it ain't my problem. He passed background checks, he showed up on time, that's my job. You want to point fingers? Look at the people who actually worked with him day to day. Meaning Claire, Martin, and maybe someone else he wasn't naming. I left him with his third cinnamon roll and a friendly pat on the back that probably left flour dust on his jacket. Eddie Grissom wasn't scared yet. That would have to change. Third visit, Helen Dobbins, the company accountant. Her home office turned out to be a tiny, claustrophobic apartment stacked with file boxes, a cat named Ledger, and an overwhelming smell of reheated coffee. Helen answered the door in a stained sweater and thick glasses. She didn't invite me in, just waved me toward the least cluttered chair. "So you think someone's cooking the books?" she said bluntly. "I think someone's cooking something, and it's not just scrambled eggs." She sighed. "Look, Mr. Goodwin, the company's finances are fine. Tight, but fine. We had a good quarter pending those new contracts." "Pending being the key word," I said. She stiffened slightly. "Claire's the one who overpromised. We're stretched thin because she wanted to impress new clients." I noted the flicker of resentment under the words. "And you? No reason to see things collapse." "Collapse?" She laughed dryly. "If Fenwick and Cole goes under, I lose everything. I've invested 4 years and all my savings into this place. You think I'd burn my own house down?" Depends, I thought, on how desperate the tenant is. But aloud I just said, "Where were you during the disappearance?" "At home. I don't work event weekends, ask anyone." I would. As I left, the cat hissed at me. I made a mental note. Even Ledger didn't like the atmosphere in that place. On the list was Natalie Ward, the event coordinator nobody had officially mentioned. Tracking her down took longer. She wasn't answering phones, and Claire hadn't seen her since the morning of the conference. I finally found her nursing a margarita at a third-rate Mexican joint in Midtown, wearing dark glasses indoors like she thought it made her invisible. She gave me the once-over and sighed. "Let me guess, you're here about the truck. You win the teddy bear, mind if I sit?" She gestured vaguely, and I slid into the booth across from her. "You know, you're the first person who's actually bothered to ask me," she said, swirling her drink. "Everyone else just assumed I screwed up." "Maybe because you have a reputation for screwing up," I suggested mildly. She snorted. "Old news. I was framed at my last job. Politics, office drama. You know how it goes." I didn't, but I nodded anyway. "So what's your angle, Natalie?" I asked. "Professional revenge, set up a disaster, walk away whistling?" Her smile was bitter. "If I wanted revenge, it wouldn't involve pastries." "Where were you during the disappearance?" "Supervising parking, checking deliveries. I didn't see Jared leave. I didn't even know a truck was missing until an hour later." Believed that. Natalie might have had a grudge, but staging a disappearing act this clean would have required skills she clearly didn't have. Still, there was something odd about her detachment, like she was standing one step outside the whole mess, watching it unravel. I left her nursing her drink and staring into the middle distance. By the time I got back to the brownstone, I needed coffee, aspirin, and maybe a brief session of screaming. Into a pillow. Instead, I found Wolfe already waiting in the office, a finger lightly tapping his desk. "Well?" he said. I dropped into the client chair. "They're all dirty. Question is, which one's the muddiest?" "Report," he commanded. I did. Names, motives, weak alibis, the lot. When I finished, Wolfe steepled his fingers under his chin. "One of them," he said, "is lying by omission, not fabrication, omitting an essential fact." I frowned. "Which?" "That, Archie, is what you will now determine." "How?" He smiled slightly. "You will apply pressure, gently, like a cook, test à souffler, and if it collapses," he closed his eyes with satisfaction, "then we shall dine." Each suspect introduced with distinct emotional textures building contradictions, without solving yet Wolfe's indirect but commanding strategy, natural narrative. Continuation from Section 3 without reveals yet. If there's one thing I've learned working for Nero Wolfe, it's that pressure isn't always a matter of shouting or pointing fingers. Sometimes it's the casual glance, the idle question, the half-smile that says, "I know you're lying and I'm just waiting for you to admit it." Wolfe was a master at it. Me, I preferred a more hands-on approach. But when the boss says soufflé, you don't serve steak tartare. So I started the next morning slow and polite, firing off calls to each of our 4 little liars. I arranged casual follow-ups, checking details, verifying timelines, all under the guise of routine. Wolfe wanted them rattled, but not cornered. Yet. While I worked the phones, Wolfe sat behind his desk with his usual air of monumental disinterest, sipping beer and pretending not to listen. He was, of course, catching every syllable. By noon I had nibbles but no bites. Martin Cole was curt, Helen Dobbins defensive, Eddie Grissom oily but controlled, and Natalie Ward passive-aggressive to the point of being comatose. "There, sitting tight," I reported, tossing my notebook onto the desk. "Naturally," Wolfe said, "criminals prefer inertia to activity. It preserves their fabrications." Before I could suggest lighting a few fires under them, the doorbell rang. Fritz answered, as always, and a moment later he ushered in Claire Fenwick herself, looking 10 years older than she had 3 days ago. Her hair was mussed, her eyes red-rimmed, and she clutched a manila envelope like it contained her last hope. "I need your help," she blurted without preamble. Wolfe didn't blink. "You already have it. If you wish to withdraw your commission, that is another matter." No, She broke off, clearly struggling for composure. "Something's happened. I think someone's trying to sabotage me." Wolfe raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Claire stepped forward and laid the envelope on his desk like it was a live grenade. I stepped over and flipped it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly folded. No letterhead, no signature. Typed, not handwritten, the E. Message was short and ugly. "Withdraw your contracts. You're finished. This is your only warning. No threats of bodily harm, no demands for money, just pure clinical malice." "Where did you find this?" I asked. "In my office. This morning. Slipped under the door." "Sometime overnight. Anyone else have access?" She shook her head. "The building's locked after hours. You need a security card to get in." Wolfe finally deigned to speak. "You suspect one of your associates?" Her mouth tightened. "Yes, I don't know who, but—" She hesitated. "We're scheduled to meet with a potential new client tomorrow. If this gets out, it'll ruin us." Wolfe nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "You will leave the note with me. Mr. Goodwin will attend your office this afternoon. He will observe. You will make no mention of this incident to anyone else." Claire swallowed hard, but nodded. She left the envelope on Wolfe's desk and fled like the hounds of bankruptcy were nipping at her heels. I turned to Wolfe. "You think it's connected to the truck job?" He gave me a look reserved for particularly dense questions. "Of course. The note is not merely intimidation, it is assurance. Assurance that silence will be purchased, not demanded. It suggests desperation. And desperate people make mistakes, I said, catching on. Wolfe nodded. Go, attend, watch. I arrived at Fenwick and Cole's offices an hour later. The place buzzed with barely contained tension, like a beehive after someone shook the branch. Claire introduced me as a consultant on security protocols, which got me a few suspicious glances, but no open hostility. I planted myself in the main room, notebook in hand, and watched. Helen Dobbins spent most of her time glaring at her ledger sheets, like they had personally betrayed her. Martin Cole paced between the break room and the copier, clutching a sheaf of menus. Natalie Ward made an appearance around 2, dropping off a stack of delivery manifests with all the enthusiasm of a condemned prisoner. Eddie Grissom never showed, but he wasn't officially on site anyway. At 3:30, something happened that made my internal alarms start clanging. I'd left my notebook on Claire's desk when I went to use the restroom, deliberately, just to see if any of our fine, upstanding citizens had itchy fingers. When I came back, the notebook looked untouched. But when I flipped it open later to jot down a note, I noticed something odd. A page was missing. Not a page I'd written on, an empty one from the middle, neatly torn out, so clean it was almost professional. I stood there for a full minute, staring at the gap, feeling the pieces click into place. Somebody had taken a blank page. In an office full of computers, printers, and sticky notes, someone had felt the need to steal paper. My paper. Why? Simple. Paper can be matched. Typewritten threats can be traced back to source material. Typewriter ink, ribbon impressions, even the paper stock itself. If the anonymous note Claire received had been typed on a stolen sheet from my notebook, it wouldn't match the standard office supplies. It would match mine, which would make it look like I had sent it. Cute, very cute. I closed the notebook slowly, casually, and smiled. Now we had moved past petty theft into active sabotage. Someone was panicking and starting to make mistakes. Back at the brownstone, I laid it out for Wolfe while he demolished a plate of sweetbreads with Madeira sauce. He listened, wiped his lips fastidiously, and leaned back. Elementary, he said. Don't you dare say that while I'm standing here, I warned. He smirked, an actual smirk, and steepled his fingers. The theft of your paper indicates not merely desperation, but a narrowing field of action. Our adversary knows that physical evidence will be scrutinized. Their attempt to obscure it has failed. How do you figure? Because you noticed. Therefore, the evidence is not merely missing, it is misplaced. The absence is itself proof. I shook my head. You're enjoying this. He allowed a small nod. Marginally. The blunders will multiply. I sat down. So what's the next move? You will call Claire Fenwick, Wolfe said, and inform her that the anonymous note will be subjected to professional analysis. But we're not sending it to a lab. Of course not. We shall claim we are. Announce it loudly enough that our culprit hears and acts accordingly. And when they do, Wolfe allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Then, Archie, we shall know them. Smooth continuation from the previous developments, subtle but serious sabotage, missing notebook page, building internal pressure among suspects, Wolfe's controlled strategic escalation without revealing anything too soon, Archie's humor and sharp observation intact in the world, according to Wolfe. Pressure is not something you announce. It's something you apply so subtly that by the time the subject feels it, they're already pinned to the wall. So when he ordered me to spread the word that the threatening note was heading off for professional forensic analysis, I didn't just make a few polite calls. I made sure every ear connected to the case heard about it, loud and clear. Claire Fenwick, Helen Dobbins, Martin Cole, even a casual voicemail to Eddie Grissom. Word traveled faster than free champagne at a wedding. I did my job so thoroughly that by sunset, every suspect in our little drama was either sweating or pretending they weren't. That's when things escalated. It was close to 10 o'clock. Wolfe had retired to his orchids. I was in the office sorting my notes, and Fritz was humming tunelessly in the kitchen. A typical evening, slow and predictable, until the sound of shattering glass ripped through the quiet. I was on my feet instantly, bolting toward the noise. Fritz appeared in the hall, white as his apron, pointing toward the back of the house, the greenhouse. Without waiting for backup, I grabbed the nearest thing resembling a weapon, a heavy brass umbrella stand, and pounded through the hall to the glass doors leading into Wolfe's precious orchid rooms. I caught just a glimpse, a shadow ducking through the broken panel, vanishing into the night. I charged after it, but by the time I made it through the wreckage and onto the back lawn, the intruder was gone. No footsteps on the wet grass, no car engine roaring to life, just the lingering smell of rain and the faint metallic tang of fear. I cursed under my breath and returned to assess the damage. It wasn't random vandalism. Whoever it was had been after something specific. One of the small potting tables near the back had been rifled through. Tools scattered, drawers yanked open. I found Wolfe 5 minutes later, surveying the wreckage with an expression that suggested he was calculating the precise number of murder charges he'd like to press. "They touched my trowels," he said, voice low and dangerous. Fritz hovered nearby, looking ready to either faint or start polishing the entire room with disinfectant wipes. "They weren't looking for gardening tips," I said grimly. "They were searching for something." "Of course," Wolfe said, stepping delicately around a pile of cracked pots. "They assumed the note might already be under forensic examination, hidden somewhere secure. They feared discovery. So, they broke into a fortified house to find a single piece of paper?" I asked incredulously. "Desperation, Archie," Wolfe said. "It compels the foolish to acts of profound idiocy." I rubbed my forehead. "Should we call the cops?" Wolfe shook his head firmly. "No, not yet. We shall let our interloper believe they have gained an advantage. False security breeds fatal mistakes. Meaning we'd pretend the break-in hadn't changed a thing. Meaning someone out there would get sloppy. I didn't love it, but Wolfe's record with these things spoke for itself. So we cleaned up the worst of the mess, secured the house, and retreated to the office to plot our next move. That's when Sol Panzer arrived. Sol Panzer isn't just good at his job, he's the best. If the world were fair, Wolfe would have a statue of Sol in the front hall instead of that ridiculous globe he never uses. I'd phoned Saul earlier in the day on Wolfe's orders, asking him to do a little quiet background digging on our 4 suspects. He delivered his findings without preamble, settling into the red leather chair with a slight nod. "Grissom's deep in debt," Saul said. 2 lawsuits pending, both for breach of contract. He's desperate for cash. "No surprise there," I said. "What else?" "Helen Dobbins has been making irregular wire transfers. Small amounts, but consistent. Last 3 months. Blackmail money?" I suggested. "Possibly. Or she's skimming from the business to cover her own debts." Wolfe grunted. "Continue." "Martin Cole applied for a business loan 2 weeks ago. Big one, got rejected." "And Natalie Ward?" I asked. Saul hesitated, a rare thing for him. "She's clean, sloppy lazy, but clean. If she's involved, it's indirect. Meaning our real players were Grissom, Dobbins, and Cole, meaning the noose was tightening." The next morning, Wolfe summoned Claire Fenwick to the brownstone under the pretext of reviewing case developments. She arrived flustered, but trying hard to maintain the kind of composure she probably reserved for screaming clients. We sat her down in the office and walked her through what little we could afford to reveal. That sabotage was confirmed, that certain individuals were under suspicion, and that further pressure might force a confession. Claire listened carefully, nodding, clutching her purse like it might sprout wings and fly away. Finally, Wolfe leaned forward slightly, a monumental shift by his standards. "Miss Fenwick, you must feign reconciliation with your colleagues. Project confidence. Trust. Arrange an informal gathering this evening. Drinks perhaps, or coffee. Invite Martin Cole, Helen Dobbins and Eddie Grissom. Her eyes widened. All three? Yes. Make it seem as though the crisis has passed, that you believe the theft and the note are unrelated, that no further investigation is forthcoming. She swallowed. And then? Then, Wolfe said, Mr. Goodwin and I shall attend as uninvited guests. Her lips twitched. Nerves or humor, I wasn't sure. I'll try, she said. No, Wolfe corrected mildly. You will succeed. That night, we staged our little ambush. Claire rented a private room at a mid-level Italian restaurant downtown. Cozy, dimly lit, perfect for whispered betrayals. I arrived first, posing as a bored patron nursing a whiskey at the bar. Wolfe, naturally, remained parked outside in a hired town car, directing the action like a general at war. From my vantage point, I watched Claire greet each guest in turn. Martin Cole arrived first, carrying the brittle smile of a man determined to survive the evening without saying anything incriminating. Helen Dobbins came second, tight-lipped and defensive, her eyes scanning the room for exits. Eddie Grissom swaggered in last, oozing charm like a broken tube of toothpaste. They settled into awkward small talk, laughing too loudly, drinking too quickly. At Wolfe's whispered command over my earpiece, I made my move. I accidentally bumped into Martin Cole on his way back from the restroom, spilling my drink conveniently onto his jacket. While I apologized profusely and offered napkins, I slipped the folded envelope into his inner pocket. The same envelope Claire had received, an identical copy, harmless, blank inside. 15 minutes later, Claire announced she needed a quick call and stepped outside. 2 minutes after that, a frantic Martin Cole was on his feet, muttering something about forgotten appointments, his face pale as cream cheese. He left in a hurry. I followed. Continuation of mounting pressure. Break-in at the brownstone. Saul Panzer's findings adding critical layers of tension. Strategic psychological baiting planned by Wolfe pacing remains tight and true to Rex Stout's style, Archie's first infiltration. And tactical move. I let Martin Cole think he was outpacing me. That's the trick. You don't chase, you shadow. You let the rabbit run itself ragged. He stumbled out of the restaurant, jacket clutched tight, and flagged a cab like a man about, to miss the last lifeboat off a sinking ship. I stayed far enough behind to avoid notice, but close enough to catch the address he barked at the driver. The cab pulled away. I grabbed the next one. Follow that heap, I told my driver, and he grunted like he got that request twice a day. We tailed Cole uptown, past the commercial district, past the nice neighborhoods, into a cluster of tired-looking apartment blocks where the only thing gleaming was the occasional reflection of streetlights off dented car hoods. Cole bailed out in front of a narrow brick building, checked over his shoulder once, didn't see me, and hurried inside. I waited 5 minutes, then followed. His name wasn't on any of the buzzers, but Wolfe had prepped me for this. People with secrets don't announce themselves. I loitered near the door until a teenager coming out let me slip inside without question. The hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and despair. Perfect. I found Cole's door by the simple method of listening. Thin walls make for easy eavesdropping. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. I heard frantic rustling, drawers opening, papers shuffling, a voice cursing under its breath. I knocked. Silence. I knocked again, harder. A pause, then Cole cracked the door open 2 inches. His face was pale and sweaty. What do you want? He snapped. Friendly chat, I said. From Nero Wolfe. He tried to slam the door. I stuck my foot in, painful but effective. Open up, Cole, I said, all pleasantness gone from my voice, or we can do this with more official company. He hesitated, then sagged. He opened the door and shuffled backward. The place looked like a tornado had taken a personal interest in it. Papers everywhere, an overturned lamp, a coffee table stacked with catering manifests and event schedules. At least 2 of the documents had the Fenwick & Cole logo stamped at the top. "Lose something?" I asked casually. He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You should learn fast. Wolfe doesn't like liars. He likes them even less when they waste his time." He stared at me, defiant but cracking. I could smell it. "You know, Cole," I said, wandering the room like I had all day, "it's funny. People think theft is the hard part. Getting the goods, getting away, but it's not. The hard part is staying bought after the fact. Keeping your story straight, sleeping at night." I plucked a document off the floor, a catering schedule for the contractors' conference, carefully annotated with red pen. "You're not very good at sleeping, are you?" He sank into a battered armchair, face crumbling. I didn't plan this. I swear, I raised a hand. "Save it. You're going to tell Wolfe." And when Wolfe was done with him, he'd wish he had confessed to me instead. Back at the brownstone, I delivered Cole like a cat dropping a mangled mouse at the doorstep. Wolfe barely looked up from his book as we entered. He just gestured grandly toward the client chair, and Cole collapsed into it like a puppet with cut strings. For a while, Wolfe said nothing, just let the silence build like a thunderhead. Cole fidgeted, squirmed, wiped his palms on his knees. Finally, Wolfe spoke, voice calm and quiet. "You orchestrated the theft." Cole flinched but didn't deny it. Wolfe continued, methodical as a man arranging library books. "You colluded with Jared Lomax, promised him compensation in exchange for removing a vehicle containing valuable goods. Food, yes, but also specialty items easily resold, white truffles, imported caviar, high-grade cheeses." Cole swallowed hard. "You disabled the security camera yourself the night before, using your access privileges. You arranged to have the manifest falsified to omit certain inventory items, covering discrepancies." Cole's mouth worked, but no words came out. Wolfe leaned back, lacing his fingers over his stomach. "What you did not anticipate was Mr. Lomax's independent ambition. That got Cole's attention." Wolfe's mouth twisted into something resembling a smile. "Lomax double-crossed you. He let it sink in before continuing. Instead of meeting you for the agreed handoff, he disappeared with the entire load. Truck, goods, and all." Cole buried his face in his hands. "I didn't know, I swear. I thought he said he just needed the truck to make a quick delivery, sell a few items on the side, split the profit." Wolfe's eyebrows lifted an inch. "And you believed him." Cole's voice was a croak. "I was desperate. The business loans, I thought if I could just get enough cash, keep Fenwick & Cole afloat a little longer." "By ruining them," Wolfe said icily. "Your loyalty is touching." Cole looked up, desperation lighting his eyes. "I can help you find him. I know where he hangs out. I can—" Wolfe cut him off with a flick of his hand. "You will remain available," Wolfe said. "Accessible at my convenience. Should you attempt to flee, Mr. Goodwin will retrieve you, with less civility." I gave Cole a grin that didn't promise much in the way of good manners. Cole nodded miserably. Fritz showed him out gently but firmly. I turned back to Wolfe. "Satisfied?" "Not yet," Wolfe said. "There's more?" "Of course." Cole's confession addresses the theft. It does not explain the sabotage, the threatening note, the break-in here. Those acts reek of a different desperation, meaning someone else was still playing their own game, meaning we still had snakes in the grass. Wolfe tapped the arm of his chair thoughtfully. "We must tighten the net, bring them all to the brownstone, tonight." "All of them?" I asked. "All of them," he said firmly. "Dobbins, Grissom, Ward, and Miss Fenwick herself." He closed his eyes. "It is time," Wolfe said softly, "to end this." Wolfe's strategic dominance tightening around Cole's partial confession, without solving the full mystery yet, building toward the classic Wolfe-style final gathering of suspects, Archie's witty, action-driven handling of fieldwork seamless. Narrative continuation. By 7:30 that evening, the brownstone was humming with a tension so thick you could almost cut it with a knife. Fritz had set the scene with his usual precision: refreshments, comfortable seating, just enough light to make sure nobody could hide anything too well. Wolfe, of course, had been immovable in his chair all afternoon, waiting for his prey to arrive. He barely looked up when they all came in. The first to arrive was Claire Fenwick. She entered with her usual air of trying to stay in control, but her steps were hesitant, as if she knew she was walking toward an inevitable reckoning. Her clothes were perfect, but the lines on her face were becoming harder to hide with makeup. Next was Martin Cole. He entered quickly, avoiding eye contact, his hands in his pockets like a guilty man waiting for a punch that hadn't quite landed yet. He had been fully expecting the confrontation Wolfe had promised. He hadn't been able to outrun his lies for long. After him came Helen Dobbins, her eyes darting nervously. She had the look of someone who had already been caught, though she had no idea what the final evidence would be. Her defensive posture was a clear sign that she suspected Wolfe knew everything, even before she sat down. Eddie Grissom was the last to arrive. His swagger was still there, but even from the doorway it was obvious that his confidence had taken a hit. He moved slowly, with exaggerated care, clearly trying to avoid looking guilty, but failing miserably. The sense of unease was palpable, and it hung over him like a cloud ready to burst. As each one settled into their seat, the room grew quieter, the hum of tension louder. Wolfe didn't waste any time. His eyes swept over the group as if mentally rearranging the pieces on a chessboard. "Good evening," Wolfe said in his usual controlled tone. "You are all aware that I have been investigating the disappearance of a catering truck, along with the theft of several highly valuable items. What you are unaware of is the fact that there are also deeper, more troubling matters at hand. We shall address them now." He let his words settle into the air before continuing. "Mr. Cole," he said, his voice like a fine-tuned instrument, "you were the mastermind behind this little operation. You attempted to pull a fast one with the stolen goods, but your plan was foiled by your own lack of judgment. You implicated a man who was not willing to play by your rules, Mr. Lomax." Claire's face went pale at the mention of the driver's name. She opened her mouth to speak, but Wolfe held up a hand, silencing her. "You were desperate to keep the company afloat, Mr. Cole, but in your haste, you overlooked a few things. The first of which was your assumption that Lomax would be loyal to you. He wasn't, and now you are left holding the bag." Cole opened his mouth, but no words came out. He was stuck between fury and embarrassment. I watched him closely, wondering whether he would crack under Wolfe's pressure. Wolfe turned his attention to Claire next. "Miss Fenwick, you are a businesswoman with a keen sense of pride, but it has clouded your judgment. You wanted to keep your reputation intact, so you turned a blind eye to Cole's activities. You knew deep down that something wasn't right, but you didn't want to ask the hard questions. Now the very reputation you worked so hard to protect is on the brink of ruin." Claire swallowed. "I didn't know. I swear to you I didn't know about Cole's plan." Wolfe regarded her with a cool, assessing gaze. "You may not have known everything, but you knew enough to question things, and instead of doing so you buried your doubts in a mountain of paperwork and busy work." Helen Dobbins shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't do anything wrong. I only followed orders." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Following orders is no defense when the orders lead you down a path of dishonesty. Miss Dobbins, you were aware that certain items were being misrepresented in the books. Small amounts, yes, but small amounts add up over time. The moment you saw the first discrepancy, you should have raised a red flag." Helen was already shaking her head. "I didn't know. I swear I was just doing my job. I didn't—" "But you did know," Wolfe interrupted, leaning forward slightly. "You knew because it was your job to know. You are not a child, Miss Dobbins. You were complicit even if you didn't want to admit it to yourself." Finally, Wolfe turned his attention to Eddie Grissom, who had been silent the entire time. Grissom's bravado had all but disappeared under Wolfe's scrutinizing gaze. He was sweating now, shifting in his seat, unable to meet Wolfe's eyes. "You, Mr. Grissom, are the final piece of the puzzle. You were the one who set the wheels in motion. You supplied the driver, you arranged the delivery, and you offered the perfect cover for Cole's plan. But you didn't account for the fact that the truck would go missing, along with Lomax." Grissom sputtered, trying to keep his composure. "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I didn't plan for Lomax to disappear. I thought we had it all under control." "But you didn't," Wolfe said sharply. "What you didn't count on was a man with more ambition than you bargained for. Lomax wanted a bigger cut, so he took the truck, and in the process he dragged all of you down with him." Grissom opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He realized, I think, that there was no point in defending himself anymore. Wolfe had laid everything out so clearly, so concisely, that there was no room for any other version of the truth. Wolfe looked at each of them, one by one, before leaning back in his chair, his expression cold. "You all wanted something. A quick fix, a shortcut, but in the end you've all lost." The silence hung heavy in the room. "I don't know about the rest of you," Wolfe said, "but I'm quite hungry, Mr. Goodwin. I believe it's time for dinner." As I stood, I saw the looks exchanged between the suspects. Some were resigned. Others, I suspected, were calculating their next move, but none of them spoke. They knew the game was over. Wolfe's casual dismissal of them was chilling in its efficiency. But before they could leave, Wolfe added one more comment, his voice almost a whisper, but with the same clarity as everything else he'd said. "There is one thing that remains, of course. Whoever sent the threatening note, whoever broke into my office, whoever still thinks they can outrun the truth, that person will soon have a reckoning of their own." They all shifted uncomfortably, and I knew Wolfe had just cast the final net. The real culprit, the one who had orchestrated the sabotage, was still sitting at the table, pretending to be innocent. And Wolfe would be watching them closely. So closely that they wouldn't even know when he moved in for the kill. The formal, classic Wolfe-style gathering of suspects, clear revelations of each suspect's complicity, and Roll Wolfe's authoritative yet calm method of deconstructing the mystery, heightened pressure and tension as the suspects realized their cornered strong build-up toward the final resolution, with Wolfe's impeccable control. The room had been quiet for almost 20 minutes when Wolfe finally spoke again. His voice, low and controlled, seemed to slice through the tension that had settled over the group. "I will not waste time with further niceties," he said. "The game is over. I know who did it." The suspects, Claire Fenwick, Martin Cole, Helen Dobbins and Eddie Grissom, stared at him, their faces a mixture of dread and confusion. Each one was trying to read Wolfe's mind, hoping he was bluffing. But Wolfe didn't bluff, he never did. "I have already exposed enough of your actions," Wolfe continued, his gaze sweeping over each of them, lingering on their faces. "You have all contributed to the downfall of Fenwick and Cole in one way or another. You all believed that your actions would remain hidden, that you could control the chaos you created." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. "But there is one among you," he said, his eyes narrowing, "who believed they could outsmart me." Claire shifted in her seat, her eyes flicking nervously between Wolfe and the others. "Wolfe, I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do," Wolfe replied. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Miss Fenwick, trying to keep up appearances. But your true concern wasn't the truck or the theft. It was your business. And in that desperation, you made a crucial mistake." "What mistake?" she asked, her voice trembling. "The note," Wolfe said simply. There was a pause as Claire's face drained of color. "The note?" she repeated, a little too quickly. Wolfe nodded. "The note you received. The one that threatened you." Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Do you see now?" Wolfe continued, his voice dripping with quiet triumph. "You thought it was an anonymous threat, but in fact, it was a carefully staged act to cover up the real culprits. Drax, you didn't think it through. You handed me the answer without even realizing it. I saw it too, and so did the others." Wolfe was laying out the final steps of the puzzle. "Let's break it down," Wolfe said, pacing slowly. "Who benefits from the chaos? Who needed Fenwick and Cole to fall? Who had the most to lose?" The tension in the room was palpable. The answer was hanging in the air, but nobody wanted to say it out loud. Wolfe didn't let them off the hook. "Miss Fenwick, you were desperate to protect your company. But there was someone else who saw this as their golden opportunity. Someone who needed the business to collapse for personal gain." He turned to Martin Cole. Cole's face went ashen. "No," he whispered, but his eyes betrayed him. "No." "I didn't, Martin Cole," Wolfe said, his voice cutting through the air. "You're the one who orchestrated the theft. You knew the truck and its contents would fetch a pretty penny, but when things went awry, when Lomax disappeared with the goods, you needed a scapegoat. You needed to control the narrative. You knew if Fenwick and Cole's reputation went down the drain, you'd have a shot at the pieces." Cole's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. He looked like a man trying to outrun a freight train that had already caught up to him. "And yet," Wolfe continued, "you weren't the mastermind. You were merely a pawn in someone else's game. Someone who saw your desperation and seized it." Martin looked toward Helen Dobbins. She looked back at him, eyes wide, but it wasn't her. It was clear that Wolfe was not done. "I'm afraid, Mr. Cole, that you've been a part of a larger scheme. The true mastermind behind this entire operation is someone who was hidden in plain sight." Wolfe's eyes narrowed on Eddie Grissom, who had been sitting in the corner, nervously twisting his ring around his finger. He looked up slowly, his face going pale. "Eddie Grissom," Wolfe said, the words coming with deliberate precision, "you are the one who orchestrated the entire affair. You arranged the theft, you helped cover it up, and you ensured that every piece of the plan fell into place. But you weren't just after money. No, you had something far more valuable in mind." Grissom's face twisted in shock, then anger, but Wolfe wasn't finished. "You saw this as your chance to get rid of Fenwick and Cole and take over the catering contracts, but you didn't want to go it alone. You needed someone with the financial means to help you pull it off, someone who could cover the financial aspects of your plan." Claire's eyes widened. You... "Yes," Wolfe said, turning to Claire. "You. In your desperation to save your company, you provided Grissom with the means to execute the plan. You may not have been aware of the full extent of his involvement, but you were complicit in his scheme." Claire recoiled, horror filling her eyes. No, that's not—" "I'm afraid it's true, Miss Fenwick," Wolfe said, his voice like ice. "You knew Grissom had his hands in the pot. You knew the risks, but you allowed him to proceed because you were blinded by your own fear." There was a long pause. Eddie Grissom's bravado had crumbled entirely. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. "You're wrong," Grissom said weakly. "You don't know." "Oh, I know," Wolfe said coldly. "I know every detail. You underestimated me, Grissom, and now you'll face the consequences." The room fell silent as Wolfe's words echoed through the brownstone. The true mastermind had been unmasked. There was no more room for games or lies. "Well, Archie," Wolfe said, turning toward me with a faint smile, "I believe it's time for dinner." I smiled back, though I wasn't feeling particularly hungry. Right on time. The grand reveal, exposing the mastermind behind the entire scheme, tension-filled moments as each suspect's role is uncovered. Wolfe's calm but razor-sharp deconstruction of the case, Grissom's emotional unraveling as his lies are laid bare high. Stakes finally coming to a head, with Wolfe securing justice. The door had barely closed behind Eddie Grissom when the quiet of the brownstone seemed to settle back into place like a heavy blanket. The tension that had hung in the air since the first call about the missing truck was now gone, but it was replaced by something else, something heavier. The weight of the truth. I glanced at Wolfe, who was sitting back in his chair, as unmoved as ever, hands steepled in front of him. He had won, of course, but that was never the point. Wolfe always won. I leaned against the desk, watching him closely. So that's it, then. Grissom goes down, Cole and Fenwick walk, and the rest of them slink back into their little corners. Wolfe glanced at me, an expression of mild amusement in his eyes. I expect you to understand, Archie, that justice is a relative concept. In this case, the truth is enough. I raised an eyebrow. That's a bit abstract even for you, he smiled faintly. Not for me, Archie. For some, the truth is all they need. For others, it's a matter of where they sit in the larger picture. I looked back at the office door where Claire Fenwick and the others had just left. They'll be fine, won't they? Claire, I mean. She gets a slap on the wrist, a few bad press articles, but she walks away with her company intact. And the others, well, Grissom's the one who pays. Wolfe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his attention to his orchids, his fingers gently tapping the edge of the pot, as if considering some deep, unspoken thought. Finally he spoke, his voice as calm as ever. You're not wrong. But you must also understand that people like Miss Fenwick will continue, as you put it, walking away. But they will never have the same peace they once had. The weight of knowing what they were willing to do to protect their interests will follow them. I didn't say anything for a moment, letting Wolfe's words sink in. It wasn't just about the case anymore. It was about the choices they made, the moral compromises they had embraced. Wolfe didn't hand out sentences. He handed out truth, and sometimes that was worse than any prison sentence. I guess that's what keeps you going, isn't it? I asked quietly. The idea that they won't escape the guilt. Wolfe's eyes met mine, and for the first time in the entire case, I saw something more than his usual detached precision. There was something more human behind those eyes, something that I think had always been there, just waiting for the right moment. Perhaps, he said softly, perhaps that is part of it, but it is also the principle. We are all responsible for the choices we make, for the lies we tell, and for the truths we hide. I nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling over me like a fog. Wolfe didn't care about revenge. He didn't care about putting people behind bars. What mattered to him was the unmasking of the truth and the clarity it brought to the world. That was his form of justice. No punishment, no retribution, just the cold, hard clarity of understanding. So, what now? I asked. Wolfe's lips curled into a faint smile. Now, Archie, we wait. Wait for what? For the next case. I chuckled, a little surprised at his calmness. Isn't that the answer you always give? Of course. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant as if he were already contemplating his next meal, his next case, his next move. There is always another case, always another puzzle to be solved. That is the nature of our work. I raised my glass, empty as it was, in a mock toast. Well, at least it keeps you entertained. Wolfe's gaze softened for a moment before he gave his trademark half-smile. I suppose. But I would not call it entertainment, Archie. It is a duty. And just like that, the conversation shifted. Wolfe had a way of turning every word into something more than it appeared. It wasn't just about solving crimes. It was about preserving the order of things, making sure the truth had its time to shine. And in a world full of deception, that made all the difference. The next few days were relatively calm. Claire Fenwick handled the fallout from the case with a mixture of exhaustion and relief. She had been caught in a web far beyond her control, but she would emerge from it, bruised but not broken. The business would continue, but something had shifted within her. That was what I couldn't help but wonder about. The small, subtle changes that always came after a case was solved. People never stayed the same. They couldn't. As for Martin Cole, he disappeared from the public eye entirely. I don't think anyone heard from him again. His betrayal was the hardest to understand, but it was also the most common. Desperation had a way of bending people out of shape, and when the opportunity for a quick fix presented itself, people like him had a tendency to fall into it. Helen Dobbins returned to her life, though I couldn't say she'd learned much from the experience. People like her never seem to change, no matter how many times they're forced to face the consequences of their actions. She had her job, and she would go on with it, always carrying the knowledge that she'd crossed a line and never quite managed to scrub it clean. Eddie Grissom, well, he didn't exactly fade into obscurity. But his future wasn't as bright as it had once seemed. He had a knack for getting into trouble and managing to wriggle out of it until now. Now he would have to live with the knowledge that Wolfe had him cornered and that he would never be able to shake off the consequences of his own actions. I leaned back in my chair, thinking about the case, about the people, the lies, the choices. It was strange the way Wolfe operated. He never seemed to care about the traditional outcomes, whether the criminals went to prison or not. For Wolfe, it was always about the unraveling of the truth. That, and watching people squirm under the weight of their own guilt. Dinner was served at 8, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like there was peace in the brownstone. We sat down, Wolfe with his usual air of contentment, me with my usual appetite. We didn't talk about the case much. We didn't have to. Wolfe took a bite of his food, then looked up at me with that familiar, piercing gaze. "Archie," he said, his voice calm and assured. "You've done well." I smirked. "Isn't that what I'm supposed to do?" He didn't answer, and for a moment I thought he was lost in his thoughts. But then he spoke again, his tone softer this time. "Perhaps. But not everyone can do what you do. Not everyone has the patience for it." I leaned back in my chair, savoring the moment. Well, Wolfe, someone has to keep you entertained. And for the first time in days, Wolfe's smile reached his eyes. The aftermath of the case, with Wolfe's final philosophical take on the truth and its weight reflection on the moral implications for each character involved, Wolfe's calm closure and Archie's recognition of Wolfe's unique perspective closure to the case, and the return to the usual rhythm of life at the brownstone. It had been a few days since the dust settled on the case, and the brownstone had returned to its usual state of controlled chaos. Wolfe had been submerged in his orchids, of course, and I had been doing my best to keep the rest of the world from intruding on our peace, but even Wolfe's comfort was interrupted by the looming thought of another case, another puzzle that needed solving. And as much as I wanted to unwind, I knew there was one last piece left to this particular puzzle, one final truth that hadn't been fully acknowledged. I found Wolfe in his chair as usual, deep in thought, or at least pretending to be. "Wolfe," I said, breaking the silence, "there's one thing I don't understand." Wolfe didn't look up. He simply continued to gaze at the orchid in front of him. "I suspect there are many things you don't understand, Archie. I suggest you start with the most obvious." I raised an eyebrow. "No, I mean this case. So I get it, mostly. But what about the real mastermind behind it all?" Wolfe's eyes flicked to me, but only for a moment. "The true mastermind has already been revealed." I shook my head, slightly confused. "Grissom was the one who orchestrated it, but what about the person who set it all in motion? Who benefited the most from the truck disappearing?" Wolfe's lips twitched, and I knew the game wasn't over yet. "Ah, you're paying attention then," he said, his voice low and measured. "But you're looking in the wrong places." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "You see, Archie, while everyone else was caught up in the chaos of the theft, there was one person whose actions had gone unnoticed. One person who thought they could take advantage of the situation without getting caught. I leaned forward, intrigued. Who? Wolfe took a slow breath, like he was savoring the moment before delivering the final blow. Miss Fenwick? I stared at him. Claire, but she— Yes, Claire Fenwick, Wolfe interrupted calmly. She was not an innocent bystander, Archie. She was too clever for her own good. It took me a moment to catch up. You're saying she planned it. But she had nothing to gain. Wolfe's eyes glinted with amusement, as if he had been waiting for me to arrive at this conclusion all along. She did have something to gain. The company, Archie. If the business collapsed, if Fenwick and Cole was ruined, she could simply start fresh. She had been hiding behind her good intentions, but deep down, she knew she could make a profit off the fallout. There was only one problem. She had no control over what happened afterward. I was silent for a moment, trying to process everything. But she didn't steal the truck. Grissom did. Wolfe nodded. Correct. But Claire Fenwick masterminded the entire setup. She orchestrated the perfect storm of circumstances and manipulated others into thinking it was a random act of theft. She allowed Grissom to take the fall, knowing full well that if things went wrong, she would be able to salvage her position. I shook my head in disbelief. So all this time, Wolfe stood up from his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his lips. All this time, Miss Fenwick thought she could use us as pawns in her little game, but as always, she underestimated the one thing that matters most in this world, the truth. I stared at Wolfe, marveling at his ability to strip away the layers of deception with nothing more than his sharp mind. So what happens now? I asked. Wolfe turned his attention back to his orchids. Now, we let her live with her choices. Her business will survive for now, but the cracks are showing. It's only a matter of time before she realizes that no amount of manipulation can hide the truth for long. In the end, the cost of her actions will outweigh any short-term gain. I nodded slowly, realizing the finality of it all. Wolfe didn't care about punishment or retribution. He cared about one thing: justice through clarity. The truth always came to light, one way or another. And for Claire Fenwick, that truth would eventually destroy her. As I turned to leave the room, Wolfe spoke again, his voice softer now. You did well, Archie, he said. You kept your head when others would have faltered. I paused at the door, surprised by the rare compliment. Thanks, Wolfe. You know, I never thought I'd be the one helping you catch the crooks. Wolfe's eyes twinkled for a brief moment. It was only a matter of time before you realized your full potential. I smiled to myself, then made my way to the kitchen. Wolfe had done it again, solved the case, revealed the truth, and brought justice. It didn't matter who got the credit or who went to jail. What mattered was that the truth had won. As I sat down to dinner, I realized just how much I had come to appreciate Wolfe's methodical approach. It wasn't just about solving mysteries. It was about understanding people, their motivations and their desires. Wolfe had a gift for seeing through the lies and finding the heart of the matter. Dinner was served, and for the first time in days, I could taste the satisfaction of knowing that the world was, for now, a little bit cleaner. Wolfe's final reveal of Claire Fenwick's deeper involvement, the closing of the case, with justice served through Wolfe's intellect and strategic maneuvering, deep character insight, showcasing Wolfe's unwavering commitment to truth, a satisfying conclusion with closure for the mystery, the suspects, and the reader.